Welcome to the VIG Archive. Today, we're taking a look at two political and economic ideas that have shaped history and continue to generate debate today: socialism and communism. You've probably heard these words used in political arguments, on television, and across social media, sometimes almost interchangeably. But socialism and communism are not the same thing, and the differences are important. Where did these ideas come from? What did thinkers like Karl Marx actually propose? How does democratic socialism differ from revolutionary communism? And what happened when communist movements actually came to power? In this video, we're going to look at these questions historically and objectively, without trying to convince you to support one political position or another. So, let's begin with the basics: socialism versus communism. And if you enjoy exploring history and ideas with us, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the VIG Archive, and leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Slide one.
The words socialism and communism are often used interchangeably in political debates, but they don't mean the same thing. They're related ideas, but they come from different traditions and histories. In this presentation, we'll look at what each term has meant historically, how movements have used those terms, and why the differences matter. Socialism and communism both emerged largely in response to industrialization. The factory system created extraordinary wealth, but also harsh working conditions for many 19th century laborers. Long hours, low pay, dangerous conditions, and few protections. A wide range of reformers and revolutionaries started asking whether an economy based mainly on private ownership was fair, or whether society should organize production differently. Socialism grew out of many of these responses. Communism developed as one particular revolutionary tradition within that wider story. Socialism is not a single system. It's a family of ideas that generally argue that major economic resources should be managed in the interest of society as a whole, not solely for private profit. But socialists disagree on what that looks like. Some favor government ownership of key industries. Others emphasize things like worker cooperatives, strong public services, or regulation within a democratic framework. So when someone uses the word socialism, it's always worth asking what kind they mean. Historically, there have been socialist parties that embraced parliamentary democracy and sought gradual reform, and there have been socialist movements that called for much more sweeping changes. Some socialist traditions defend private property and markets alongside a strong public sector and social safety nets. Others have been more skeptical of markets altogether. That's why you'll sometimes hear very different policy ideas all described as socialist. The label covers a lot of ground. Communism, especially in the Marxist tradition, is a more specific concept. In Marxist theory, it's the end stage of historical development, a classless society where the means of production are held in common and the state itself eventually withers away. That's an important theoretical point. What Marx described is not simply a big government controlling everything. It's a stateless society that comes after socialism. That theoretical vision is very different from what later self-described communist governments actually built, which brings us to how communist movements operated in practice. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were German theorists who wrote in the mid-19th century. In 1848, they published the Communist Manifesto, a political pamphlet that argued history is driven by class struggle. They claimed that capitalism created deep conflict between the owners of capital, the bourgeoisie, and the working class, the proletariat. Their writings inspired later revolutionary movements, though events in the 20th century often unfolded quite differently from Marx's original predictions. In the 20th century, several governments described themselves as communist, including the Soviet Union after 1917, China after 1949, and Cuba in the late 1950s. In practice, these states built one-party political systems and centrally planned economies with extensive state control. Supporters argued that central planning could modernize rapidly and reduce inequality. Critics pointed to political repression, limits on civil liberties, economic inefficiencies, and, in many cases, severe human suffering. These were not stateless, classless societies in the Marxist sense. Understanding that gap between theory and practice is crucial when people use the word communism today. They may be referring to a theory, to a set of historical regimes, or sometimes just using it as a general label for an opponent. It's always worth clarifying. One of the biggest distinctions between many modern democratic socialists and revolutionary communist traditions is strategy. Democratic socialists typically work through elections, labor organizing, and legislation. They accept multi-party democracy and civil liberties as non-negotiable. Revolutionary communist movements historically argued that the capitalist state couldn't simply be reformed and would have to be overthrown. That debate was especially intense during the late 19th and early 20th centuries and shaped splits inside left-wing movements around the world. Capitalism is generally based on private ownership, investment, and market exchange. In reality, most countries blend markets and private enterprise with various forms of government programs and regulations. The United States, for example, has a predominantly capitalist economy, but also public schools, Social Security, Medicare, infrastructure spending, and regulations on everything from food safety to banking. So when we compare systems, we're often comparing different kinds of mixed economies rather than pure textbook models. That makes clear definitions especially important.
Read slide 10.
Countries like Sweden and Denmark are often called socialist in U.S. political debate, but those countries still have private ownership, markets, and capitalist firms. What sets them apart is a larger welfare state, robust public services, strong labor protections, and higher taxation. That's often described as social democracy. It's a political and economic approach that tries to combine capitalism with extensive social protections. Whether one thinks that's desirable is a matter of opinion, but it's not the same as a centrally planned economy. Here's a simple takeaway. Socialism is a very broad umbrella covering a wide range of views. Communism refers more specifically to the Marxist revolutionary tradition and to states that historically claimed that label. So, not every socialist is a communist, and not every social program is socialism. Clarifying the terms usually makes any conversation more productive. Instead of assuming what a label means, it helps to ask what specific policies or institutions a person supports. That move away from labels and towards specifics usually lowers the temperature. Over the past century and a half, the meanings of socialism and communism have shifted across countries and historical contexts. Political parties have rebranded. Critics have used the words broadly. Supporters have used them differently. So a lot of arguments come down to people using the same word in different ways. That's why historians often pay close attention to context. Who is speaking? When? And what exactly do they mean? Being clear about definitions doesn't settle political debates, but it does help us understand what we're actually debating. So, to wrap up, socialism and communism grew out of some of the same historical concerns: industrial capitalism, inequality, and class conflict. But they developed into different traditions with different goals, strategies, and historical outcomes. Those differences shaped major events in the 20th century and continue to influence how people talk about politics and fairness today. Understanding the distinctions won't end disagreement, but it can make our conversations more informed, more precise, and a little less confusing. That's the goal here at the VIG Archive.
Thank you for joining us today at the VIG Archive. Please like and subscribe to this channel, and please leave any comments below. What do you think about socialism and communism? And I know people these days have some pretty strong ideas. So please, without being nasty to each other, leave some comments. Thank you.